They were once the crown jewels of the American road, gleaming symbols of strength, success, and pride. The mighty pickup truck, the heartbeat of blue-collar ambition and suburban power. For years, these machines defined what it meant to make it in America. A Ford F-250 King Ranch wasn't just transportation, it was a statement. $80,000–$90,000 of chrome, leather, and horsepower. But today, that same truck can't fetch 17 grand at auction. Across the United States, thousands of high-end pickups sit abandoned on dealer lots, baking under the Texas sun. Banks are freezing credit lines, repo yards are overflowing, and desperate dealers are slashing prices to pennies on the dollar. A luxury vehicle once marketed as a status symbol has become a financial nightmare. It's not just a slump, it's a collapse. This isn't a story about cars. It's a story about illusion, about how an entire industry, automakers, lenders, and consumers, built a dream out of borrowed money and advertising slogans. For nearly a decade, Detroit convinced America that anyone could afford luxury if they just signed on the dotted line. The numbers looked good, the loans got longer, the down payments shrank, and every new truck that rolled off the line pushed the market further away from reality. Between 2015 and 2023, the average price of a new pickup jumped 60%. Wages? Up just 25%. Families who once paid off their trucks in 4 years now needed 7. Behind the scenes, manufacturers quietly paid dealers to keep ordering models no one could afford. Financial arms of the automakers approved loans at 110, even 120% of vehicle value. The goal wasn't to sell trucks. It was to keep the illusion alive. Then, interest rates rose. Inflation bit into paychecks. Suddenly the dream collapsed. Buyers defaulted. Repo agents started working double shifts. A Ford that cost $90,000 new sold for $16,000 at auction. In Dallas, hundreds of brand-new pickups lined the lots of Manheim, the nation's largest auction house, and nobody bid above 17. Tonight, we're going to uncover how it happened, how the most profitable segment in the auto industry turned toxic almost overnight, who saw it coming, and who kept the secret quiet. This is not just a story about trucks. It's the story of a bubble that finally burst. They used to call it the American dream on 4 wheels, a machine that could conquer mud, snow, highways, and life itself. For decades, the pickup truck wasn't just transportation, it was identity. In small towns and sprawling suburbs alike, a gleaming Ford, Ram, or Silverado parked in the driveway said something deeper than words ever could. It meant stability, success, and pride. A man with a King Ranch badge on his tailgate didn't just own a truck, he owned a piece of America. The advertisements told us that, the movies reinforced it, and the culture believed it. From construction sites to corporate parking lots, the pickup became the great equalizer, bridging the gap between the working class and the white-collar dreamer who longed to feel rugged again. By 2020, owning a luxury pickup had become a kind of performance, a ritual of self-affirmation. Families would stretch finances to the breaking point to drive a truck worth more than their annual income. Ford's F-250 King Ranch edition, dripping in saddle leather and chrome, could reach $90,000 before taxes. Ram's limited trim offered massage seats and digital dashboards that would make a Tesla blush. Dealers called them rolling palaces. People called them investments. But under the glossy paint and stitched leather, something was rotting. Prices had risen nearly 60% in less than a decade, while wages had barely grown. The math didn't work, but the illusion did. In towns across Texas, Oklahoma, and Florida, dealerships lit up their lots like carnivals. Weekend sales came with fireworks, barbecues, and easy credit. Drive home today, no payments until next year, the banners promised. In one Dallas suburb, a dealership moved over 300 high-end trucks in a single weekend, almost all financed through loans with 7-year terms and 0 down. The buyers believed they were getting ahead, locking in luxury before prices climbed higher. The truth was, they were stepping into a trap built by an industry desperate to keep growth alive. But while the factories hummed and the commercials promised freedom, the average American household was quietly drowning. The median monthly payment for a new truck passed $1,200.00 in 2023. up nearly 80% from just 5 years earlier. To keep up, families refinanced homes, maxed out credit cards, and took second jobs. Some even rented their trucks on peer-to-peer apps to cover the note. The illusion of prosperity was maintained by debt, layers of it, stacked higher than the lifted suspensions rolling down Main Street. By early 2024, cracks began to show. Repo agents in states like Alabama and Missouri reported double their usual workload. Auctions started filling with barely used trucks, some with fewer than 5,000 miles. Dealers whispered about inventory fatigue, a polite term for panic. Yet the ads kept rolling, the influencers kept posting, and the trucks kept coming. To the casual observer, nothing seemed wrong. But under the surface, America's most iconic vehicle had become a symbol of denial, a shining monument to excess built on borrowed time. When the collapse finally came, it didn't surprise those who had been watching closely. The signs had been there all along: the inflated prices, the stretched loans, the unsustainable lifestyle built around a machine too expensive to own and too essential to abandon. The pickup truck, once the beating heart of American pride, had turned into a financial anchor. What had started as a symbol of self-reliance ended as proof of collective delusion, and in that transformation from glory to ruin, you could trace the entire story of how a nation fell in love with an illusion and how it cost them everything. The bubble didn't form overnight. It was engineered, polished, and sold, a decade-long illusion wrapped in chrome and stitched leather. Between 2015 and 2023, the average price of a new pickup truck climbed from just under $38,000 to more than $61,000. A rise so steep it should have triggered alarms across the industry. Instead, executives celebrated. They told shareholders it was a sign of progress, a reflection of the American consumer's appetite for premium experiences. In reality, it was the slow inflation of a market built on credit, incentives, and denial. The trucks weren't getting cheaper to build, but the financing was getting easier, and as long as someone kept signing on the dotted line, the illusion of endless demand remained intact. It started with a subtle shift. Automakers began phasing out their lower trims, the basic work trucks that once defined the segment. The $30,000 0-cent single-cab model became a rarity, replaced by luxury versions stuffed with digital displays, panoramic roofs, and 20-inch wheels. By 2020, the average dealer lot looked more like a showroom for high-end SUVs than blue-collar hauling. Marketing followed suit. Ford's commercials stopped showing muddy construction sites and started showing mountain cabins, designer boots, and sunset drives. Ram ran ads comparing its interiors to private jets. The message was clear. The truck wasn't a tool anymore. It was a lifestyle. The illusion was reinforced at every step. Dealers received secret bonuses for selling higher trims, often hidden under terms like marketing performance credits or inventory optimization awards. Some dealers even admitted to ordering luxury models they couldn't sell just to hit manufacturer targets and qualify for end-of-year rebates. In Houston alone, warehouse lots filled with unsold trucks, thousands of them, neatly lined up and waiting for fictional buyers. To keep them from becoming a visible problem, manufacturers quietly moved them between storage yards in different states, a practice insiders nicknamed inventory shuffling. On paper, the trucks were sold. In reality, they were waiting for a market that no longer existed. Meanwhile, the illusion spread to consumers through relentless advertising. National campaigns promised that owning a top-trim truck wasn't extravagance, it was empowerment. Ford's Built for Everything and Ram's Luxury Where It Counts campaigns flooded the airwaves. Influencers filmed slow-motion drone shots of leather interiors and sunrise tailgates. By 2021, over 70% of all pickups sold in the U.S. were luxury or near-luxury models, an all-time high. Detroit's marketing departments didn't just sell trucks. They sold identity, aspiration, and status. And for a while, it worked. Buyers believed the narrative because it felt good to believe it. But behind the glossy commercials, the numbers were breaking down. The average American household income rose just 25% in the same period. The cost of living soared, while truck prices raced ahead. Every new model year widened the gap between reality and perception. Dealers began relying on short-term manufacturer subsidies to move inventory, essentially borrowing from next year's profits to stay afloat today. Insiders called it hitting the quota treadmill. Once you started, you couldn't stop without crashing. By 2023, that treadmill was running at full speed, powered by cheap credit and the fear of admitting the market had already peaked. By 2024, the illusion was already cracking, but few wanted to admit it. Beneath the shine of dealership showrooms and national ad campaigns, the financial foundation of the pickup market was collapsing. Families that had once proudly financed their trucks for 7 or even 8 years began to realize they were trapped. Loan payments stretched longer than marriages, and the resale value of their investment was falling faster than they could keep up with. Banks, desperate to keep the machine running, had spent years approving loans with absurd loan-to-value ratios, 110, sometimes 125%, convinced that the market would rise forever. It was the same logic that fueled every bubble before it. Someone else would hold the bag when it burst, and burst it did. The first signs came quietly. Regional lenders in the South and Midwest began reporting portfolio instability, a sanitized phrase for the fact that borrowers were simply walking away from their trucks. When the repossession agents arrived, they found driveways empty and keys mailed back in envelopes. Repo yards from Atlanta to Amarillo filled to capacity. By February 2025, so many trucks were being hauled in that some repo firms started working double shifts. There were even reports of small towns hiring temporary storage space at disused airfields just to keep the overflow of seized vehicles. At one point, an estimated 90,000 pickups sat idle across 5 states, each one worth less every day it remained unsold. Auction houses, once the silent heartbeat of the used car ecosystem, turned into chaos. At Mannheim, Dallas, the nation's largest vehicle auction, staff described scenes that bordered on surreal. Rows upon rows of $80,000 0-cents trucks struggling to attract bids over $18,000 0-cents. A local news crew filmed one auctioneer starting bids at $20,000 0-cents and failing to get even a single paddle raised. In the footage, a line of freshly repossessed Ford F-250 King Ranches shimmered under fluorescent lights, each one a monument to misplaced optimism. "It's like watching gold turn into gravel," one broker muttered. By summer, the wholesale value of luxury pickups had plunged more than 70% from their pandemic peak. Dealers were the next domino to fall. The same franchises that had once flaunted record profits now found themselves suffocating under unsellable inventory. Banks began freezing floor plan credit lines, the very loans dealers used to keep vehicles on their lots. Without financing, many simply shut their doors overnight. In Oklahoma, a family-owned Ford dealership that had been open since 1962 closed in April, leaving behind a lot filled with 200 unsold trucks. Former employees said the owners tried to sell directly to wholesalers, but no one wanted the risk. Across the country, shuttered showrooms became ghostly monuments to an industry that had believed its own hype for too long. Yet amid the financial wreckage, something more subtle was breaking. Trust. For decades, Americans believed the story that a pickup wasn't just a vehicle, it was a statement of worth, a piece of stability, a badge of belonging. Now that belief was poisoned. The glossy ads that once inspired pride now drew anger and ridicule. Online forums filled with posts from owners furious at automakers and lenders. "They sold us a dream," one comment read, "and handed us a mortgage with wheels." Lawsuits followed. By late summer, several class actions had been filed against major manufacturers and captive finance divisions, accusing them of predatory lending practices and deceptive marketing. Though the cases were still pending, the headlines alone were enough to tarnish the reputations of once untouchable brands. The human toll was staggering. Bankruptcy filings tied to vehicle loans surged 38% in the first half of 2025. Repo agents, who once worked in anonymity, found themselves on the front lines of a societal breakdown. Videos circulated of tense confrontations, people sobbing as their trucks were towed away in the dead of night. In Alabama, one repo company installed security cameras on all their trucks after a driver was assaulted by a former owner refusing to surrender his vehicle. What had once been a symbol of freedom now represented failure, and that shift was more than economic. It was cultural. The collapse also exposed the quiet rot within the industry's financial machinery. For years, automakers had used short-term incentives and creative accounting to mask declining demand. Some had bundled risky truck loans into complex securities, echoing the mortgage practices of the 2000s. When defaults spiked, those securities started to crumble. Smaller banks, particularly in the South and Midwest, found themselves holding portfolios full of near-worthless paper. The federal regulators began investigating, but it was already too late to prevent the damage. For the first time, analysts began comparing the pickup crisis to the subprime meltdown of 2008, not in scale but in structure. Both were driven by the same toxic cocktail: easy credit, inflated assets, and willful blindness. By autumn, the public narrative shifted. News anchors stopped calling it a market correction and started calling it what it was: a crash. On talk radio, callers raged about corporate greed and government inaction. Economists debated how long the contagion might last, while automakers scrambled to salvage their reputations. Some announced plans to reintroduce affordable base models. Others slashed production entirely. Ford idled 2 plants in Kentucky, citing market readjustment. Ram postponed its next-generation luxury line indefinitely. But the damage was already done. The consumers had lost faith, the lenders had lost control, and the dealers had lost everything. Beneath the financial wreckage, something larger had shifted in the American psyche. The pickup truck, once a symbol of self-reliance and quiet power, had become a mirror reflecting a culture addicted to image and debt. The collapse wasn't just about vehicles, it was about values. It revealed how an industry built on pride had mutated into one built on illusion, and how millions of ordinary people had been lured into believing that success could be financed. When the illusion finally shattered, it left behind more than empty lots and unpaid loans. It left behind a question that still hung heavy in the air. What happens when a nation built on wheels runs out of road? By the end of 2025, when the dust had finally settled, the American pickup stood not as a symbol of power, but as a relic of excess. The crash had rewritten the story of the nation's favorite vehicle, turning what once represented independence into a warning about illusion. The trucks still gleamed in the sunlight, but their shine meant something different now. Less triumph, more aftermath. What was once a market built on pride and confidence had collapsed into a lesson about limits. The era of the luxury pickup as a badge of success was over. What came next was something quieter, humbler, and far more uncertain. Automakers scrambled to redefine themselves. Detroit's boardrooms, once obsessed with horsepower and chrome, now spoke in the language of damage control. Ford executives held closed-door meetings about reviving stripped-down inheritage models with vinyl seats and manual windows. Ram's CEO publicly admitted that the company had lost sight of its core customers. Even Chevrolet, long the symbol of middle American endurance, announced a return to what it called functional affordability. Yet the shift felt less like innovation and more like confession. It was an acknowledgement that the dream had gone too far. The trucks had stopped being tools and become trophies, and when the illusion shattered, so did the trust that sustained it. Consumers were different now, too. The average American buyer, once willing to stretch a loan for the sake of status, had grown wary. Pickup forums and online communities buzzed with skepticism. Never again, one post read beneath a photo of an abandoned dealership. They sold us lies with leather seats. Families that once traded trucks every 3 years began holding onto older models, fixing instead of financing. The aftermarket for used and rebuilt pickups quietly flourished. Independent garages sprang back to life, thriving where flashy dealerships had failed. It was as if the country was rediscovering the value of practicality over prestige, of owning less and owing nothing. But the cultural damage lingered. The collapse had exposed more than financial manipulation. It had shown how deeply Americans had tied their self-worth to the vehicles they drove. In small towns and suburbs, the absence of gleaming new trucks in driveways felt symbolic, almost personal. The mythology of the pickup, the rugged individual, the self-made man, the idea that freedom could be bought with a loan, had dissolved. What replaced it was a colder realism. Freedom meant not owing anyone, not even a bank. Economists called it a consumer recalibration, but on the ground it felt like a quiet revolution in values.